classes, and the Stuarts were not known for holding personal cleanliness in high regard. Fleas and lice infested people of all classes, and intestinal worms spread easily through poorly prepared food. In their spare time, people in the Stuart era enjoyed dancing, singing, and listening to live music in halls and taverns. The wealthier classes went to the theatre, while common folk entertained themselves with betting on cockfights, dogfights, and watching public executions in town squares. This era also brought new foods and drinks from around the world, thanks to expanding global trade routes over land and sea. Exotic goods appeared on British soil for the first time: furs from North America, tea from China, and spices from India. These new imports transformed the British palate. By 1633, bananas were being sold in market stalls, and the first coffee houses and tea rooms had opened. Coffee houses quickly became gathering places for men to discuss politics and business, while women were banned and instead visited tea rooms. Hot chocolate, however, was reserved as a luxury for wealthy men and women alike. The 18th century, known as the Georgian era, ushered in the Industrial Revolution. Britain became dominated by steam power, networks of canals, and factories producing goods on a massive scale. Yet many workshops remained small, like those of textile workers who spun, wove, dyed, and repaired cloth. Different regions specialized in industries: metal production in the Midlands, mining in the Northeast, and glasswork in the West Midlands. New technologies transformed both farming and manufacturing. Food production increased, ensuring more supply, but for the poor, affording it remained a challenge. Cheap labor from foreign workers and vagrants caused mass unemployment in rural villages, pushing many to move into towns and cities in search of work. Factories grew rapidly, powered at first by water wheels, windmills, and horses. But everything changed with the steam engine, pioneered by Thomas Newcomen and later improved by James Watt. Steam power increased output, pumped water from mines, transported goods by rail, and powered textile mills. By the late 19th century, around 2,000 steam engines were in use across Britain. The Derby family of Shropshire revolutionized iron manufacturing, producing stronger metals for machines and tools. Coal mining boomed, feeding the steam engines that drove industry. In 1769, Richard Arkwright's water frame allowed large-scale textile spinning, followed by James Hargreaves spinning jenny and Edmund Cartwright's power loom, making cotton production faster and cheaper. Soon, clothing became affordable for all. Factories multiplied, employing hundreds or even thousands of workers. Richard Arkwright's cotton mills in Nottingham had nearly 600 employees, while factories in Birmingham employed close to 1,000. Even children were hired, valued for their small hands in intricate tasks like making buttons, locks, and buckles. Conditions were brutal. Factories were hot, dangerous, and often compared to prisons. Workhouses and orphanages sent children into factories and mines, where many fainted from heat or were mangled in machinery. The rise of canals transformed transport. The Duke of Bridgewater's canal linking Worsley to Manchester cut coal prices in half within weeks. By 1815, Britain had more than 2,000 miles of canals, moving tons of coal, metals, and goods. Roads, however, were neglected, muddy, overgrown, and impassable in places. The government introduced the Turnpike Acts, allowing new toll roads to be built. Engineers like John McAdam and Thomas Telford modernized the road system, making travel far faster. By the 1780s, stagecoaches could reach London from Edinburgh in just 2 days, compared to nearly 2 weeks half a century earlier. During the late 1700s, Britain also developed a strange fascination with criminals. Highwaymen and thieves were glamorized in pamphlets and newspapers, often treated as folk heroes. Jack Sheppard, a notorious thief, drew 200,000 people to his public hanging in 1724. John Rann, another flamboyant criminal, even received applause after escaping a conviction. Yet rising crime also worried the public, leading to calls for better law enforcement. Early policing was minimal. Each parish elected 2 constables, usually volunteers with little training who often paid others to cover their shifts. In London, hired watchmen known as Charlies patrolled the streets, but they were criticised as lazy and ineffective. In the 1750s, Henry Fielding founded the Bow Street Runners, the first paid, armed force dedicated to investigations and arrests. Justice, however, was deeply flawed. Magistrates judged suspects without juries, often imprisoning or executing innocents. Corruption was rampant, with many officers taking bribes. Trials were intimidating, often conducted in Latin, leaving defendants confused. Cases were rushed through in minutes, with multiple trials in a single day. Until the late Georgian period, defendants had no right to legal defense. By the early 1800s, courts followed the Bloody Code, which listed over 200 crimes punishable by death. These included treason, rape, and murder, but also theft, poaching, and vandalism. Though many death sentences were commuted to imprisonment, executions were carried out in public as grim entertainment. At Tyburn in Middlesex, up to 20 criminals could be hanged at once, paraded through jeering crowds before the gallows. Other punishments included transportation to colonies in America or Australia, where convicts endured years of forced labour. Some were flogged, branded, or imprisoned in houses of correction. With industry booming, Britain entered the Victorian era, a time of explosive growth and urbanisation. Beginning in 1837, Queen Victoria's reign oversaw the country's transformation into a global superpower. By 1871, the population had doubled, fueled by factory jobs and expanding cities. Migration surged, Irish workers fleeing the potato famine, Scots, rural English, and even Jewish immigrants from Europe and Russia filled Britain's industrial centres. Though child labour remained a problem, campaigners like Michael Sadler and the Earl of Shaftesbury pushed through reforms, improving safety in factories and mines and ending slavery in the empire. Education for children under 10 became compulsory, giving working-class families new opportunities. Police forces became more professional, and prisons were reformed with better conditions. While social class divisions remained, more people than ever before gained the freedom to earn and save money. Ambitious entrepreneurs built fortunes, rising in society and employing armies of domestic servants. By the 1880s, 1.25 million Britons worked as household staff, more than in any other industry. For the first time, wealth and status were no longer tied solely to birth or nobility, but could be earned through success in the new industrial age. A new era of social change arrived when the working class was finally granted the right to vote in 1918, followed by women achieving full suffrage in 1930. Earlier, in 1776, Britain had lost its American colonies after the Revolutionary War, forcing the empire to turn its focus toward India. During the Victorian era, expansion continued across the globe, opening new trade routes but also sparking frequent conflicts. In 1851, the Great Exhibition showcased Britain's industrial and technological achievements to the world. By this point, the British Empire was the dominant global power in trade and military might, so vast, in fact, that people often said the sun never set on it. Leisure flourished during this time. Religious holidays, seaside vacations, museums, theatres, sports, and music halls became immensely popular. Education and opportunity gave the middle class the chance to take skilled jobs, but for the poor, life remained just as hard as in previous centuries. Middle-class homes, however, evolved with iron cooking ranges that not only prepared food more efficiently but also heated water tanks. Gas-powered geysers sent hot water upstairs to bathrooms, reducing the need for maids to haul heavy buckets. Coffee houses, once bustling with affluent thinkers and political debate, gave way to offices linked by the revolutionary telegraph system, which allowed instant communication across the globe. By 1877, the invention of the telephone improved this even further. Henry Fox Talbot's invention of photography in 1834 introduced sun pictures, which became widely popular. Small photographic cards known as cards to visit were exchanged, with images of Queen Victoria and her children among the most sought after, marking the first time the public saw their monarch outside of painted portraits. At the Great Exhibition, George Jennings unveiled his modern lavatories, or halting stations, a much more sanitary alternative to relieving oneself in alleyways or corners of the street. By 1852, public restrooms were being installed, starting with a men's facility on Fleet Street and a women's lavatory on the Strand. Thomas Crapper later developed the flushing mechanism and advanced other designs, though the word crap itself came from older Dutch and French words meaning waste or rejected matter. Meanwhile, Manchester became the hub of the cotton industry, thanks to its damp climate. But the factories were filled with dust and fibres that caused severe respiratory illness, and the massive machines posed constant danger. Without safety measures, women suffered gruesome accidents, scalping when their hair was caught, or crushed limbs when trapped in machinery. Children were forced into tight spaces beneath machines to clear blockages, often with tragic results. Coal mining also fueled Britain's rise, but at a terrible human cost. Landowners grew wealthy while miners worked in appalling conditions. Children were hired to drag wagons of coal because they were cheaper and more obedient than horses. Deep underground, temperatures soared, and miners wore little clothing. drinking beer instead of water since contaminated supplies caused deadly diseases like cholera and typhoid. In 1815, Sir Humphrey Davy invented the safety lamp, making deeper mining possible, and later ventilation systems improved safety. By 1860, employing children under 12 was banned, yet the workforce only grew. From 200,000 miners, the number swelled to 500,000, and production soared from 30 million tons of coal in 1836 to 44 million tons by 1880. Laws passed in 1850 limited working hours to 10 per day and abolished night shifts, while new lighting and ventilation standards further protected workers. Even so, mining remained perilous well into the 20th century. Another injustice was the truck system, where workers were paid with tokens only redeemable at certain shops that charged inflated prices for poor quality goods. The Truck Act of 1831 sought to end this abuse, but it lingered for years. Britain's industrial breakthroughs made it the most innovative nation in the world, but success came with a price. Prosperity inspired colonies to pursue independence and forge their own futures. Meanwhile, the United States was rapidly rising, building its own reputation in technology and industry. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie in 1914 triggered the July Crisis, and on July 28 Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. With alliances dragging nations into the conflict, Britain entered what became the First World War. This devastating period marked the beginning of the modern age, shifting attention from monarchy and industrial growth to weaponry and military strategy. Trench warfare brought unprecedented death, and by the war's end, some 16 million soldiers and civilians had lost their lives. Industry turned to producing munitions, while agriculture provided food as imports were blocked by enemy forces. Women filled roles in factories, farms, hospitals, and nursing as men went to the front, proving vital to the war effort. Miners were initially told not to enlist, as coal was vital for the war, but many were later drafted to dig tunnels under enemy lines, setting explosives in one of the most dangerous tasks of the conflict. By October 1916, coal shortages forced rationing at home. Civilians were even retrained as miners to fill the gap. Agriculture also suffered as farmers, blacksmiths, and ploughmen were conscripted, leaving critical labor shortages. To fill the void, the Women's Land Army sent 260,000 women to farms to keep food production alive. The war ended on November 11, 1918, but peace was short-lived. Just over 2 decades later, Britain was plunged back into war when Germany invaded Poland, beginning the Second World War in 1939. Between 1945 and 1951, Britain worked to recover from the devastation of World War II. Winston Churchill, celebrated for his wartime leadership, was replaced by the Labour Party, which won a landslide victory in 1945. Though Churchill had delivered victory, many believed he could not lead the country in peace. Labour, founded in 1900 as the voice of ordinary people against the long-established Conservative Party, now shaped the post-war recovery, focusing on rebuilding Britain and addressing the needs of its citizens. During a time of peace, the Labour Party introduced major reforms, establishing national insurance in 1946 and creating the National Health Service in 1948, which has provided free healthcare for the British people ever since. Industries such as mining, banking, gas, and aviation were nationalised, making working environments safer and more regulated. Over time, the economy recovered, and industries regained the efficiency and profitability they had enjoyed before the war. Soon after World War II, the Cold War began between the United States and the Soviet Union. To strengthen Western allies, Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin pledged Britain's support to America. Britain joined the Korean War in 1950 on the side of South Korea and later became a founding member of NATO in 1949, alongside the United States and several European nations. NATO was created to defend against the Soviet threat, particularly as they developed nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, India gained independence in 1947, taking away what was often called the jewel of the British crown. This marked the beginning of the dismantling of the British Empire after centuries of expansion. Between 1950 and 2000, Britain transformed in many ways. Immigration increased, class divisions faded, and the welfare state was firmly established. With the loss of colonies and overseas territories, Britain turned toward Europe, eventually joining the European Union. The nation shifted from relying on manufacturing to becoming a service-based economy, depending more on imports than domestic production. Despite economic challenges such as inflation and recessions, the overall standard of living reached unprecedented heights. On February 6, 1952, Elizabeth II became Queen following the death of her father, King George VI, who had succumbed to a coronary thrombosis after years of health issues caused by heavy smoking. His death marked the beginning of a new era under one of Britain's most iconic monarchs. Although the country was technically at peace after 1945, Cold War tensions drove massive defense spending on military supplies, training, and nuclear deterrence. The fear of nuclear attack loomed large. In 1956, Egyptian leader Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, a vital trade route for Britain. In response, Britain, France, and Israel invaded Egypt to regain control. However, the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Nations strongly opposed this intervention, forcing Britain to withdraw. The crisis shook international confidence, causing the pound's value to plummet and triggering a financial downturn. It revealed Britain's reliance on allies in global military and political strategy. The 1960s ushered in a new era of liberation and cultural change. Art, experimental music, and fashion flourished, moving society away from strict traditions and eroding the old class divides. Social reforms addressed long-taboo issues such as abortion, divorce, sexual orientation, and racial discrimination. Yet, this was also a period of economic hardship. Heavy defense spending, growing imports, and lack of investment in domestic industry led to job losses and falling profits. In Northern Ireland, tensions between Unionists, who wanted to remain part of the United Kingdom, and Republicans, who sought a united Ireland, erupted into violent conflict. In 1969, Britain sent troops to restore order, but this only escalated the situation. In 1972, during a protest march, British soldiers shot and killed 14 Irish Catholics in an incident remembered as Bloody Sunday. Violence intensified, leading Britain to take direct control of Northern Ireland's government, which was supposed to be temporary but lasted 35 years. Attempts to share power between Unionists and Republicans failed, and bloodshed continued. Meanwhile, the global oil crisis of the 1970s hit Britain hard, sending prices soaring as producing nations asserted control over their industries. This triggered union strikes and economic instability. In response, Margaret Thatcher rose to power, ushering in sweeping economic reforms. Following her philosophy of free markets and privatization, she cut government spending dramatically, which caused widespread job losses and led to riots in 1981, particularly among young people and the black community, who felt abandoned and discriminated against. In 1982, Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, a British territory. Thatcher responded decisively, defeating Argentina and reclaiming the islands, which temporarily boosted her popularity at home. By the mid-1980s, privatization was in full effect, allowing ordinary citizens to buy shares in former state-owned companies and bringing major profits to the government. In 1985, the Anglo-Irish Agreement acknowledged Northern Ireland's status as part of the United Kingdom, though violence persisted. As the millennium approached, Britain embraced the digital age. The empire had largely dissolved, with most territories achieving independence. Britain deepened ties with Europe to strengthen its economy and trade, though this sparked heated debate. Ultimately, in 2016, the country voted for Brexit, deciding to leave the European Union. The monarchy continued to symbolize national unity. Queen Elizabeth II, who had guided the nation through decades of change, passed away on September 8, 2022, after a reign lasting 70 years and 214 days, the longest in British history. Her death closed a historic chapter and ushered Britain into a new era under her successors. By 2023, the country faced fresh challenges, including an energy crisis and its involvement in deterring Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Throughout its long and complex history, Britain has profoundly influenced the world, from industry and science to literature, film, music, theatre, and cultural innovation. Yet perhaps its greatest contribution is the English language itself, which has become a global means of communication, uniting cultures, economies, and nations across the planet.